Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the CLEnagers podcast. Today we have with us the CEO of the City Club of Cleveland, Dan Moulthrop. First off, real quickly, what is City Club? What do you guys do? What are your goals? Tell us more about that.
Okay, sure. So City Club, hi, thank you for having me here, by the way. City Club of Cleveland has been around since 1912. We're one of the nation's oldest, we're not the oldest, but we're one of the nation's oldest free speech forums. And what that means is that we do programs, public programs, conversations, not unlike what we're doing right now, for the benefit of the community. We do about 100 programs a year for the community. Some of them are we host at our facility at 1317 Euclid Avenue in Playhouse Square. Mm-hmm. Some we host out in the community at places like the Happy Dog on the west side or Morning Star Baptist Church on the east side. And roughly, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20% of those programs that we present to the community are free to the public. 100% of them are accessible via live stream or our YouTube archives or our podcast. And the hallmark of City Club programming from its inception in 1912 has always been this kind of 50-50 split between a presentation and a Q&A with the audience. And that Q&A with the audience is super important. The presentation could be a speech, it could be an interview, it could be a panel conversation. But the Q&A with the audience is always a direct Q&A with the audience. The audience asks the questions themselves in their own voice. And that's super important because if you think about it, there actually aren't that many places where on a regular basis, week in and week out, citizens of the community, our neighbors, have the opportunity to shape a very public dialogue. And what makes it even more public is that, as I said, we live stream everything, but also on Fridays, we have a live radio broadcast of our programs. So there are people who've been listening to a live radio broadcast of our Friday forums, noon on Fridays. Right now they're on WKSU. They've been listening to that since, for forever, their whole lives. We first had I'm just gonna keep going. So you got to jump in at some point. But we first had a live radio broadcast of our forums. Those started in 1928, almost 100 years ago. Wow. 1928 was just 2 years after radio came to the Cleveland market. It had only been invented a few years before that as a mass medium. Like I know you don't listen to the radio, you and a lot of people don't anymore, right? Because there's so many podcasts available. You can go on YouTube, there's YouTube Live and live streams and all of that stuff. Radio, for the entire 20th century, was the thing, right? It was the mass medium. It was the thing that connected people no matter where they were on the planet. You had access to a radio station. Even in Alaska, in like these tiny Inuit communities, they still had radio to connect them to their neighbors who were 50, 60 miles away, or the closest other community. So radio was this really important piece of our history. I'm really looking forward, parenthetically, footnote, I'm really looking forward to 2028 when we can celebrate the 100th anniversary of our live radio broadcasts.
That'll be really cool. What role right now do you currently play as the CEO of the City Club?
All of them and none of them. The way I see my role is mostly in support of our colleagues. So I'm constantly thinking about what do they need to be successful in their jobs. So sometimes that means helping to write web copy if they need it. Sometimes it means a lot of fundraising. I do a lot of fundraising because without money, there's no mission. There's no ability to do the mission, to complete the mission. And our mission, by the way, is to create conversations of consequence that help democracy thrive. Very simple, straightforward mission. And it allows us to really focus our attention on the most important conversations in the community. So I fundraise, I support my colleagues, I spend a lot of time on programming, on thinking about who should speak, what kind of panel conversations we should have, what issues we should address, and thinking strategically too about what are the trends in our community and where are we going to need a public dialogue about this issue or that issue or another issue. So sometimes we're ahead of the curve. Sometimes we're meeting the community right where they're headed. Sometimes we're trailing a little bit, but we're always trying to make sure that in those 100 programs we do every year, there is something for everybody, and that we're hitting all of the most important issues.
How do you measure the success of each forum in terms of reaching the goal of the overall
of the mission?
Of the mission,
How do
yes.
you measure a conversation of consequence?
Mm-hmm.
How do you measure whether or not democracy is thriving as a result?
Yeah.
How do you measure a year? Can we sing Rent right now? 525,600 minutes. So I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I'll tell you, it's really hard to measure. So we can measure, there are things we can measure. How many people came to the forum? How many people asked questions? How many people watched the live stream? How much engagement did we have on social media around these forums? Did we get a media hit? Was it covered by any local media or national media,
Mm-hmm.
regional media? Those are things you can count. But the intangible stuff that you're talking about, how do you know it matters? How do you know it's a conversation of consequence? I'll tell you a couple of quick stories. A few years ago, we started with the library systems across Cuyahoga County. By the way, Felton Thomas across the street would be a great person to interview. It'd be super easy to do because he works right across the street. You'd have to meet him perhaps on a weekday.
Yeah.
But he's the director of the Cleveland Public Library, and he was a key partner in this story I'm about to share with you. We worked with the Cleveland Public Library and the Cuyahoga County Public Library systems, including yours in Orange, and there are 9 public library systems across Cuyahoga County. I bet you're thinking, can he name all 9 of them? Well, I've just named 2 of them, and then I'm gonna and watch this. Watch me whip. Watch me nay. Does anyone say that anymore? I don't think so.
No.
No, not at all. Euclid, East Cleveland, Heights, which is University Heights, Cleveland Heights, Shaker Heights, Westlake, Rocky River, and Lakewood. So that's all 9. And we worked with those 9 library systems to do a community-wide read. And that book that we selected was called Evicted. It was by an author named Matthew Desmond, a nonfiction book basically about life at the very bottom of the housing market, at the lowest end of the housing market, where when you get evicted, you're homeless, right? And there's nowhere else to go. And these are the worst places that you would never want to live in. And in the opening of the book, he says, he was reporting it out in, I think in Minneapolis was or Milwaukee. I think it was Milwaukee. And he said, but this could be Cleveland, it could be Detroit, it could be any of these cities that we know that are these legacy Rust Belt cities. And we invited the community to read that book, and we had programming at every single branch of every single library system across Cuyahoga County. City Club did some programming, Ideas Dream did some programming around it. I personally delivered copies of the book as a gift to every member of City Council. And the county executive's office was involved as well. And we then, at the end of it, invited Matthew Desmond in, and he spoke to about 1,000 people at Playhouse Square. And it was a phenomenal event. One of the suggestions that he makes in terms of policy proposals at the end, like how can we better support the challenges how can we better support the people who are facing the challenges at the bottom end of the housing market, people who are most likely to be evicted. And he said one thing is right to counsel. Housing court, in most places, there is no right to counsel. It's not a criminal court, it's a civil court. So while the landlords have to be represented by a lawyer, there is no right to counsel for the people who are being evicted, the tenants. And that means that there's an inherently uneven playing field, right? Because if the landlord has a lawyer and is paying for a lawyer, and then you are about to be evicted and because you non-payment of rent, but you haven't paid your rent because the roof leaks or whatever, like you've got a legit reason, but you're not being represented by a lawyer, it's just like a power imbalance, right? So he said right to counsel is really a way to shift that dynamic. So a couple years after we did that, I ran into the council president and the housing court judge at an event, and they were talking to each other. And I was like, you guys aren't talking about right to counsel, are you? And they're like, actually, we are. And this was a legal aid event. And so Colleen Cotter, by the way, the executive director of Legal Aid, would be another great guest for you. And I went over to talk to my friend Melanie Shakarian, who runs fundraising for Legal Aid. Mm-hmm. And I said, check that out. They're talking about right to counsel. And she was like, I know. It's because of you guys. And I was like, what do you mean it's because of us? She's like, we've been advocating for right to counsel for years and years, but it wasn't until the City Club started having conversations about it on your stage that it became a possibility and a real active policy proposal and legislative proposal that found support at City Hall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So now there are hundreds of people who are not being evicted from their houses and their rentals because we hosted those conversations and brought the community together. Give you another quick example. I love these stories because otherwise, without these stories, I have a really hard time explaining what a conversation of consequence is and how we measure it. Council President Purnell Jones of Cuyahoga County Council, he's sort of works alongside Chris Ronayne, previous guest on this podcast. Mm-hmm. Purnell Jones will not be the council president in the incoming council. Dale Miller will be the new president. But Purnell and I were talking about bail reform. And he said, he was telling me one day, we're just standing outside of Playhouse Square after one of our forums that we were doing outdoors at Playhouse Square. That's another place we do free forums, by the way. And he was like, I got to tell you, you guys have had a huge impact on me. I'm like, what are you talking about? Tell me why. He said, well, people were talking to me about bail reform a lot, and I didn't really understand the issue as deeply as they did. But then you guys had a forum with Robin Steinberg of the Bail Project, and I was there for that. And the Bail Project is this organization that identifies low-risk offenders who are sitting in jail, who can't afford bail, and without bail will sit in county jail for as much as 30 days before they get to their trial and figure out what's going to happen with them. Some of them are guilty, some of them are just wrong place, wrong time. Some of them, all of them that the Bail Project works with are low-risk offenders who could be back with their families, at their jobs, and so forth. But if they sit 30 days in county jail, they will lose their jobs, get evicted, all of that sort of stuff. Mm. So the Bail Project has a revolving bail fund, and they pay the bail for these people. And they also give them support, text messages to remind them about court appearances, things like that. And they have an amazing success rate. And so Council President Purnell Jones tells me, after you had that forum, we moved legislation to invest a six-figure sum into that revolving bail fund. So because we had the forum, and because a legislator was there, the Bail Project was able to raise more money and impact the lives of more people in our community. So those are conversations of consequence that I think are helping democracy thrive.
Wow. In a current time of, in a current age of an increased polarization, mm-hmm. How does the City Club stay nonpartisan, especially with everything that's going on?
It's our job. We have in 1916, the guy who had my job was Ralph Hayes, and he wrote the creed of the City Club. And I kind of want to look it up right now and share it with you. Is that okay? Is that allowed? Mm-hmm. Okay. So Ralph Hayes had my job for just a few years, and then he would go on to work in the federal government with Newton D. Baker, who became Secretary of War under Woodrow Wilson. Newton D. Baker, by the way, was a pacifist, so that's funny. And Baker had been mayor of the city of Cleveland, and then after serving in the administration, came home back to Cleveland and founded a small law firm called Baker Hostetler, mm-hmm. that is now one of the largest law firms on the planet.
Wow.
And that's Cleveland history right there. So, give me just one quick second. I thought I was going to be able to talk and look this up at the same time. But okay, so here's the creed, the City Club creed. This was written in 1916, so 109 years ago. I hail and harbor and hear persons of every belief and party, for within my portals prejudice grows less and bias dwindles. I have a forum, as wholly uncensored as it is rigidly impartial. Freedom of speech is graven above my rostrum, and beside it, fairness of speech. I am the product of the people, a cross-section of their community, weak as they are weak and strong in their strength, believing that the knowledge of our failings and our powers begets a greater strength. I have a house of fellowship. Under my roof, informality reigns, and strangers need no introduction. I welcome to my platform the discussion of any theory or dogma of reform, but I bind my household to the espousal of none of them, for I cherish the freedom of every person's conviction, and each of my kin retains his own responsibility. I have no axe to grind, no logs to roll. My abode shall be the rendezvous of strong but open-minded men, and my watchword shall be information, not reformation. I am accessible to people of all sides, literally and figuratively, for I am located in the heart of the city, spiritually and geographically. I am the city's club, the City Club. So that creed, written in 1916, is still our North Star, right? Our job, we understand that our job is not to pick sides, put our thumb on the scale or anything like that, but to steward and be caretakers of a platform that our community requires to make up their own minds, right? Our job is to be issue agnostic and outcome agnostic, but big advocates for engagement, to welcome everybody into the conversation so that you can ask a question, or your neighbor can ask a question, or somebody else can ask a question that could shape the way that we then decide to solve the problems that we face together. We want to be the place where Democrats come to hear Bill Barr from the first Trump administration, which happened a few years ago, or the place where Republicans come to hear Sherrod Brown or some other Democratic leader. Mm-hmm. We want to be the place where people can ask the tough questions and where leaders have to face those questions truthfully, honestly. And we want to be the place where people come to have their own beliefs and their own understandings challenged and sharpened. The polarization question is really important. You brought this question you brought up. We can't get through this time unless we open ourselves to the possibility of our minds being changed. Mm-hmm. And so we want to be the place where people can come to have their minds changed and their views broadened.
What have been some of the challenges that you guys faced when trying to make sure that you stay nonpartisan?
It can be really hard to get people from both sides to want to engage all the time. Mm-hmm. We recently had a great forum right after the election. We had scheduled Congresswoman Shontel Brown and Congressman Max Miller. Mm-hmm. Congresswoman Brown is a Democrat, Max Miller is a Republican. And we scheduled them in advance, knowing that they were not facing serious opposition in their races. Mm-hmm. So it was the Friday after the election. And it was a really, really great conversation. And they did not agree on a lot of things. They did agree on a few things, but they demonstrated that even in emotionally challenging times, two people from different sides can be on the stage together, can share the stage, can share space, can listen to one another. That's, but you asked about challenges. That's one of the moments when we were able to overcome a lot of the challenges. What we find is that there are times when people who we know our community wants to hear from will say yes to our invitation, but then never schedule their actual appearance. Mm. They're like, yeah, it sounds good. Talk to my scheduler. We'll figure it out. And then it never gets scheduled. And that's with sometimes, elected officials who are serving the people of Ohio, but they don't want to engage directly. And that can be very challenging. The other challenging thing too is that we live in Cuyahoga County, which, as you know, is like 70+% Democratic. Mm-hmm. And so it's hard to convince Republicans that this is in their interest to come and speak, to come and hear from, to come and speak to and hear the concerns of a largely Democratic audience that is going to ask them probably questions they don't want to have asked of them. So those are some of the challenges that we face.
What's been a memorable moment or forum in your time as CEO?
They're all memorable, and well, not all of them. I mean,
No.
some are total. Some are absolute dogs. You're like, why? You're like halfway through the forum. You're like, why did we book this? And then there are some where I'm thinking, I'm expecting it to be a total like dog, and it turns out to be an amazing forum. And like I'm like, oh, my instincts were really wrong on that. Obviously, like meeting President Obama was like a singularly like intimidating and exciting moment. Meeting Angela Davis last year, she spoke at the City Club, and it was electric. Absolutely, just to be in her presence. I mean, she had such an impact on the country in the 60s and 70s, and some of the 80s, and like just to be in her presence was amazing, absolutely amazing. And I'd known of her. I lived in Northern California for a while, and that's where she lives, and so, but I was like totally intimidated by her. Yeah, it was fun. But just on Friday, we had Victor Ruiz speak. He's just retiring after 15 years of leading Esperanza, and we had asked Keisha Gonzalez, who works at the Cleveland Foundation, to moderate the conversation. I didn't know that I figured she knew Victor, but because they're both, it's a small community, they're both part of the Puerto Rican community. And then on stage, she realized, she pointed out, she's like, that she was an alum of Esperanza under Victor's leadership. He had met with her, interviewed her, and then she was awarded a scholarship. Part of what the work that Esperanza does is providing scholarships to members of the Latino community, la Latina comunidad, and that was so cool. And then during the Q&A, Merle Johnson, another great guest, former teacher, former state school board representative, Greater Cleveland. Merle stands up and asks this question of Victor, and Victor, in his answer, thanks her for being his 7th grade teacher. And I was like, what is happening here? I mean, I was going to cry. I was like, this is so beautiful. It's so great. So that Fridays for that whole, like, these sort of intergenerational things. And, I used to be a school teacher a million years ago in California. And so, and you always tell yourself as a teacher, you never know the impact that you're having, right? Like, I'm sure this works, but right now I feel like I'm not successful, but I'm sure down the road these kids will go on to do wonderful things, and whatever we're doing here in the right now is going to make a difference. But that was like one of those moments where like Merle Johnson taught Victor Ruiz. Victor Ruiz goes on to Tri-C and CSU and or wherever he went. And I'm pretty sure Tri-C, because he used to serve on the board. He was chair of the board of Tri-C. So Merle Johnson teaches Victor Ruiz. He runs Esperanza. He becomes chair of the board of Tri-C. And then he, through his work at Esperanza, is able to provide support to Keisha Gonzalez. Keisha's just one of like hundreds of people who have benefited from those scholarships. Keisha's now running social impact investing for the Cleveland Foundation, right? So it's just and Merle's a part of that story. Merle's not directly responsible. Victor's not directly responsible. Keisha's not directly responsible. Oh, we're all part of this story. But that's huge. Like that kind of there's a flywheel and some like exponential powers happening right there. It's just, it was really, really neat. It was really cool. And also, so that's like City Club right there,
Yeah.
right? That's happening at the City Club. Where else is that going to happen? Where else in our community is that happening? It's not really, like on a regular basis, 100 times a year, that kind of opportunity, those kind of conversations. There are lots of people convening dialogues and doing events. Nobody is doing it the way that we do it. And I'm not saying this to like toot our own horn, but I'm saying it's just sort of a fact of like how it is. And the reason it works so well is because we have momentum, we have history behind us, and we have partners like the folks at IdeaStream who broadcast our forums and help us live stream all of our forums, and Playhouse Square that gives us a bigger venue when when Pete Buttigieg comes to town, or and like there's a ton of partners and all of our corporate partners who support what we do, all of it. It's just incredible. So anyway, I can't even remember what question you asked. I think it was about memorable experiences, but that one on Friday was memorable. But also, honestly, like every week you could ask me that question. I'll just tell you about the last forum and why it mattered.
How does the City Club help engage with its community, and how specifically are you helping to engage with students and youth, like people like me?
Well, I mean, the community stuff I think I've explained a lot.
Yeah.
So let me tell you about our student programming. There's a few different aspects of our student programming. Students attend forums, but they usually come. You've probably come with your class, and that's typically how most young people engage with City Club. And what I love about our student attendance program is that it's the only place in our community where students are participating in civic life alongside their adult counterparts and really at parity with their adult counterparts, right? There's no kids table at the City Club. There's no we'll take questions from kids after the forum or something like that. No, the kids are there. Students are asking questions, and often they're asking better questions than the adults are. The adults have a tendency to sort of slip into like either their same like axe grinding question, or a self-interested question, or a statement that's not really a question. And students are typically like, hey, I just want to know this, and they ask the question real quick, and it's an amazing, insightful, incisive question. So probably 10 to 20% of our audience right now, overall, if you count them up through the year, is students who are attending for free. We also have a youth forum council that invites students like you from across the region to come together on a regular basis to come up with ideas for City Club forums and then to produce those forums. And our high school students are serving as they write the scripts, they do the introductions, they moderate the panels, they come up with the idea, they reach out to panelists, they book the whole thing, they write the web copy, all of that stuff. And we just sort of provide support. We give them the platform, and we help to we document it, we live stream it, we do all of that stuff. We have a photographer there, but really the students are doing all the work. I got two more things to answer your question too. We also have an essay contest, the free speech essay contest, which I'll send you a link to, and I want to tell you what the prompt is, because you need to write an essay for this. There's a cash prize. Okay, it's going to be on the blog, I hope. Let's go. And the essay contest has been running for probably 12 or 13 years now, and it is always about some aspect of free speech. For a bunch of the first years, it was like, what does free speech mean to you? And like the answers were getting more and more boring over time. So now we change it every year, and students actually write the prompt. So our student interns and the Youth Forum Council will help with writing the prompt. So here's our prompt right now. In recent years, student protests on various issues have sparked debate over the balance between free speech and institutional authority. In some cases, universities have responded with disciplinary actions, such as suspensions or expulsions, when students did not comply with warnings to end their protests. In light of this, think of a current or past example where student free speech has been questioned or challenged. Should students be punished for expressing their views, or does free speech protect their right to protest? How much control should schools have over student expression, and where should the limits be drawn? So we try and make these prompts timely and compelling, and then there's also like a bunch of resources that we build out around those. The last thing, we have a college student attendance program as well. So, but that's just beginning to grow, mostly through Tri-C and CSU. And then we also sponsor and host the High School Debate Championship, the Lincoln Douglas High School Debate Championship, which you may have attended as well. And that's every year in March. So that's how we engage with the student community.
Our school is actually, I don't know if we're affiliated with this City Club, but we are hosting our own forum, I think February 1st, one of the clubs I'm in.
Really? Which club?
I'm in the Male Minority Leadership Group, and we're hosting it early February. I forget the guy's name who's doing it. but it's pretty similar to civic engagement and what you guys are doing.
That's great. That's great. I'm glad you're doing that.
And how do you see City Club growing in the future?
I think we moved into our new home at Playhouse Square just last year, and it's created a lot of new opportunities and a lot of great visibility for us. And so I think that our growth lies in a few areas: in audience expansion, in connecting with more students, and then also through programming, through increased programming. Or shifting our programming focus. So we've been doing these lunch forums for 100 years, 112 years. At Playhouse Square, I think there's we have an opportunity to really lean into evening programming in our new location in ways that didn't make sense before. And we saw that with Pete Buttigieg, and we've seen that with some other guests as well. So I think we have some opportunities there, different kinds of programming, and also using different venues in and around Playhouse Square.
Okay, what's the most challenging aspect of being CEO of the City Club personally?
I think there are lots, for me, I'm going to share something with you. Like, I'm like a bit of a magpie in that, like, I'm very susceptible to like chasing the shiny object, and like the new project or something like that. And that can distract me from the importance of staying focused on the operation and focused on the operations of the City Club so that we can improve what we do and make it more successful, more efficient, more effective. So for me personally, that's the most challenging thing, because like I want to chase these shiny objects. I want to have more like podcast conversations with great people like you, instead of just focusing on doing like the basic work of managing the organization more effectively. I have great colleagues, so I don't have nobody's like going rogue or anything like that. But keeping my focus on the thinking of the City Club as the shiny object I want to chase. That's how I'm reframing it for myself.
How's your background in journalism shaped how you lead the City Club?
That's a great question. I think it is the main thing that informs how I lead the City Club. So, I'll give you a few examples, but journalism, I loved working in journalism, and journalism is about tight deadlines. It is about like getting product and content created and out the door. It is about in the media, whether you're in like the news media or the entertainment media, right? There's this sense of like you've got deadlines, you just get the work done, and you may have to work longer hours, but like it's important that you get it done. So Lorne Michaels, who created Saturday Night Live, says, we go on Saturday night at 11, not because we're ready, but because it's Saturday night at 11. So, if this were a live radio show, like I couldn't have been late, right? Yeah. You couldn't have been still setting up. We would have had a live show to go to make happen. So that sensibility about it has, I think, really helped us think about the importance of creating the content, creating the dialogue, and recognizing that while it's nice to have 6 weeks to put something together or even 6 months to put something together, you don't need that, and you can do it in 3 days if you have to. So like the Pete Buttigieg forum, we would have loved to have had 6 or 8 weeks. We had about less than 16 days to manage that. We've been talking to them for a while, but we couldn't announce until almost the last minute. And we're capable of doing that because I think our organization over these last 12 years has become equipped and to manage those kinds of things. Our board president used to write and deliver 100% of the introductions to forums, every Friday forum, and most of the others too. And I got to City Club in 2013. I was like, this is ridiculous. like our board presidents are like managing partners at law firms. Should not be spending their time writing introductions. We should be drafting those introductions for them so that they can revise the introduction and make it their own, but not like drafting. Like that was crazy. And because I came from a journalism background, which is mostly writing and communications, right? I understood how to do that and how to support others in producing those, and understanding like, because I used to host a program every day when I was on public media. I would get to the office around 6:30 or 7 a.m. and the program was starting at 9 a.m. And in between, and I would write the introduction. Every morning I would write the introduction for that morning's show. Now you may be asking yourself, why didn't you write it the day before? Why didn't you write it the week before? Well, sometimes the program hadn't been booked until the day before because we didn't know, because we had to be timely, right? Or something changed and we blew up the show and said we've got to talk to the mayor about this other thing, right? So, and also you have to write with a sense of like, what is your listener thinking about right now? Because when I'm on at 9 a.m., I had to be thinking about what is on the listener's minds. What have they just read in the news this morning, right? So so the thing that I might have written the previous week was probably not as relevant as the thing I could write that morning. Okay. So you would give yourself 20 minutes to write that introduction. That's only 2 minutes long, less than 2 minutes long. You can't take that much time.
Yeah.
And so I think that's sort of the operational side of things. From a content standpoint, though, like the editorial decisions we make at the City Club, they're very much like the editorial decisions that news organizations are making. Who's important? What's the important conversation to have? What should we be spending our time thinking about and talking about? We're constantly thinking about that, and I think about it always like from a journalistic lens. How can we are part of this bigger news and information ecosystem. How can we leverage that position to help the community as much as possible? That's kind of that, and all of that is like journalistic training.
And for my final question.
Okay.
What advice would you give to aspiring leaders trying to make a change, not only in their civic community, but their just general community as well?
Is this the same question? You ask this same question of every guest?
No.
Oh. I was wondering, because do you listen to the Ezra Klein podcast?
No.
He's one of the best interviewers and thinkers, and every one of his podcasts ends with the same question, which was, what are 3 books you'd recommend to our listener? Advice for aspiring leaders, is that what you said?
Yes.
If you believe that a change ought to happen, there are a few things you can do, right? You could advocate, you can complain, which doesn't do anything. You could advocate, figure out who to advocate towards, like who to speak to, who is the leader who has the decision making, or you can become the leader. And obviously complaining doesn't do much.
Yeah.
Right. There was a moment a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where we were feeling, that it was very, very difficult, and it still is, to get people to say yes to opportunities to debate in politics, in like campaigns. And I thought, there ought to be like a statewide organization that manages debates, that sort of works with all of the media, is a broad collaboration of media entities and civic entities, and manages debates for the whole state. And then I realized, I'm like, oh, that means I have to like work on this. I have to actually create. So we created the Ohio Debate Commission. And sometimes that's what happens when you realize like there's a problem and you can see what the solution is, you can imagine it, probably means you might be the person to implement that solution. So, get off your butt and do it. Give it a shot. Sometimes you have to spend some time talking. You can't just do it, right? You have to spend a lot of time coalition building, talking to people, figuring out if it's workable. But it's worth it. It's worth exploring. It's always worth exploring, and don't let any one person's negative response stop you from exploring it further.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're so welcome, Anthony.
Thank you, Dan.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Nice to meet you.
And good luck.